Kai, want to come back?
Marlon's like,
Oh,
do I get a second degree?
all right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us, the Black Futures Collective, as we begin our preliminary conversation about defund the police and what we're really talking about. My name is Marlon. I am an organizer here with Defund Police, and prior to this, I had done a lot of work organizing within housing and along the lines of inequality. I'm very excited to get going, and we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves. To my left.
Hi, I'm Kai. Hi, I'm Kai. My pronouns are they and he. I'm going to be moderating today and doing a little bit of tech support. I have worked with Southwest Workers Union the most, as well as I currently work for Trans Lifeline, which is a trans-specific suicide hotline. And we also work to get grants out to trans folks. Yeah, and I'm also a member of Black Futures Collective. I'm going to pass it to Richard.
Hey, everybody. I'm Richard. Pronouns are he, him. I actually don't live in San Antonio. I live in Fort Worth, but I travel sometimes, not a lot of time, and definitely not during COVID right now. But happy to be here with all of my peeps in the Black Futures Collective and all the viewers out there. I currently organize with the Campaign to Fight Toxic Prisons, among a bunch of other organizations. And I'm always happy to be a part of any discussion that evolves around what can we do to strengthen our communities. And one of the ways to strengthen our communities is through defunding police. I guess do I pass it now to you, Camille?
Yeah, I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Camille, pronouns her. I'm not new to activism or organizing at all, but I've been doing it from the background, behind the scenes for a while. A proud member of Black Futures Collective, where I've been able to find my voice. So just happy to be here in this panel tonight.
Hi, my name is
Passing it.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if I was supposed to wait to be introduced. My name is Amori. I'm a new member of Black Futures Collective, pronouns she and her. I'm a transgender woman of Black experience, of course. I have mostly done activism since I was 19 about LGBTQ rights and trans rights, but of course I'm Black, so that's the first thing people see. I am finally in a space where I can help more with Black rights, which is something which is inescapable for me. And I have experiences with homelessness, experiences with inequality, inequity, have worked all kinds of jobs, regular ones, not so regular ones. I have been at all kinds of parts of the system. And I know that having a degree doesn't fix everything all the time either.
So we are having some technical difficulties right now. It is not playing on YouTube currently. Yeah, I don't know. Is there any live comments? Are people live commenting? I don't think so.
Let's see.
Yeah, do we have any live comments that we can?
Can we confirm if it's streaming elsewhere?
Just through the link. I'm gonna click on the link. Let's see.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah, it says we have like 24 waiting, but
I'm gonna try to log in onto the YouTube, and I don't know like how that will go. So give me 1 second.
We got some comments. We got some comments that said they can.
Oh, really?
Us. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh no, couldn't watch.
It says 30 waiting.
I know. I'm wondering
we have some comments.
With the waiting. Like, let's just go ahead
some
and
comments.
Then we'll just have to post it.
What'd you say?
Yeah, we'll just have to post it later for
Wait, can you record
the rest
this?
of the people. It's gonna post to YouTube after.
The link goes to the wrong one, is what Celeste says.
The link posts. What does that mean?
Goes to the wrong, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, if you
Okay.
click on our
Bree
page,
said they see us. Connections. They said the connection is fine on their end.
the link, we just have to
Okay.
update the link.
So, do you guys
Right.
want to,
If someone,
since it's recording,
Yeah.
do you guys
Okay.
want to-
It seems like it seems like it's working, but it seems like it's going to the wrong link. Folks are going.
It's linked to the YouTube channel. If you send me the Insta link, did not work, is what I think that's Tommy. So because that was the link I had. So if there is a different link, send it to me and I can go ahead and we can broadcast here. So you want to end the broadcast and come back?
I think I'll just go ahead and send the link and turn my camera off, and then if folks want to answer the question of like, what does defunding look like currently, or like for you, or no?
I'm confused. So are we ending this broadcast and then restarting? Is that what they're saying? Or
Oh wait, we're good. We're live.
ending this broadcast and then restarting? Is that what
We're working.
Okay.
Oh, wait. So we're good. I'm gonna hop. Hello everyone. I'm gonna hop back off and we can get started. Okay. I'm just tech support.
Okay, so I'll try to figure out the link also, and I'll send it to Katie in the group outside of this, so that if there are people waiting, they can go ahead and join, and we can fix that on our Instagram. But we're gonna move on. Thanks y'all for sticking with us, and feel free to send in like any questions that you have on defunding, especially specific to San Antonio. Especially if you are new to this idea completely. We're going to start with the question of what does defunding look like to you? And we're going to take those questions from our panelists. I don't know, Marlon, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So, in a sentence, defunding the police to me looks like economic justice, right? So, what we do is we have it's a regular kind of doctrine of city policy that you draft these budgets. And if you take a look at the budget for San Antonio, what we have is that about $479 million are invested specifically to public safety, whereas 54 million as a whole are split between housing, education, and infrastructure. And so what we're doing there is, since we can't spend the same dollar twice, is that we're essentially inventing the problems that we're asking the police to then manage, because they can't actually solve them. They're not equipped with the tools or the skills to actually solve problems for like homelessness, for example. So what we're doing is we're essentially inventing inequality or social problems that we then act as if are inherent to a specific population of people that live in these disinvested areas. So for me, defunding the police looks like beginning to take money out of that budget and to instead funnel things like a food bank, things like hospitals, things like infrastructure and workforce development programs, funding arts, for example. Defunding the police is just about creating it's a transformation of the public safety model from something that is punitive or based on punishment for a crime to one that is preventative, that kind of treats the motivation that one might have for a crime, which is a lack of access or something like that, to making sure that everyone can eat, making sure that everyone is housed, so that there's not even that incentive to commit a crime to begin with.
Should I go next, or
Yeah,
It's all you, Richard.
All right, cool. All right, so defunding to me, like I'll say it in a couple of ways, in a couple of different words. So first, defunding means safer communities, and it means rethinking safety, because typically when we think about what makes our community safe, what makes people safe, the first thing that comes to a lot of people's minds is the idea of policing or police officers. But one of the problems with that is that we typically use policing and police officers as a way to address every single issue that our community faces. And the other issue with solely depending on policing is that policing represents a reactive and not a proactive response to communal issues. So when I say community safety, what are some of the ways that we can get to the root of a particular problem or issue that our community is facing? So a practical example might be mental health issues or homelessness. Those things are very practical things that impact our communities. So what are some practical strategies that we can use? And one that's personal to me as a teacher and educator, schools. What are ways that we can make schools safer without relying on police? And one of those ways that I like to talk about is creating community support system for both the children, that attend schools, as well as like parents and teachers. So it's about that creating, for me, it looks like creating community support for our people.
Okay, yay, me next. So to try and explain it in a way that these two lovely gentlemen have not, let's see. For me, because I am new to what defunding is, and I've kind of been clouded with the word reform for a very long time, and learning to remove that from my vocabulary and challenging anybody that is watching to do the same. Defunding for me means a shift in the budget. If you're a numbers person like me, it's easy. Why are they getting so much money and have such an important job and it's not being done? So a shift in the budget, reallocating your resources is simply put how I have been able to really understand it for myself and educate others.
I'm going to explain what I think of defunding police briefly, succinctly, using personal examples. In my own life, I have seen the effects of depending on police for people going through mental health crises within my own family. When I was a kid, I remember the police needing to be called on my biological father, and they did take him away. He was not really in a good place to be around us, but there was no mental health counselor, there was no intervention specialist there. It was really about taking away someone for doing something bad. What led up to it was really not considered. In my own life as an adult, I did have an issue with a family member as well, and there were, again, no mental health intervention specialists, no crisis interventionists, nothing like that. All I had was to possibly call the police. And admittedly, when I did call the police, it was my mom who asked to call them actually on my behalf. They were really of no help. All they did was take a statement and told me I needed to move out. To me, it was a real life example of the different things I've been told about police and seeing how useless they are for different struggles. If there were other services which would have been able to come out, maybe I would have been able to have some actual progress at the time, and that family member could have gotten help as well, which would have helped us. Now imagine how that affects people. I, for example, couldn't just go and get the job and have everything work out as they said I should. I'm lucky, I'm 30. That right there was like 9 years ago. But some people by now would have had probably much more they went through.
So if Kai, are you available? Do you want to ask us the next question, or do you want us to run through ourselves? Okay, so with that said, I guess we'll move on to the next question, which is what are the long-term goals of defunding? And I will ask Rich first.
Sure. Okay. Long-term goals for defunding. So I'll say it a couple ways. I'll say this a couple ways too. One of the long-term goals of defunding the police is basically taking resources. Marlon, you hit on this in when you're saying what defunding means to you. Every city has a finite amount of money and a finite amount of resources. So in one sense, its long-term goal is creating racial equality. And it's about creating a system that doesn't just feed to one group of people, but creating a system that's based on the community's needs. And it's no surprise to anybody on here or to most people that Black and brown communities, trans communities, queer communities, those are typically the communities that do not get the resources that they need to not only survive for survival, but to thrive. So for me, long-term goal for any form of defunding effort, any form of defunding means that we are shifting who has the power in our communities. We're shifting the ideas of what safety means. We're shifting what it means for people to have access to vital resources, healthcare, shelter, food, education. So for me, when we're talking about the long-term goals of defunding, I want to make sure that part of that conversation is ensuring that our Black and brown, trans, and queer communities have vitality. And the only way that can happen is through creating a communal accountability where those with resources are held accountable and responsible for how those resources are spent within the communities of people who live there. Yeah, I'll keep it simple. I'll let you guys get to more specifics for how that looks in San Antonio.
Also, I'm back, so I got backstage for a moment. Who wants to go next on what are the long-term goals of defunding? I saw somebody in the chat put abolition also.
I kind of wanted to say that too.
I'm not afraid to say it.
I'm 100% an abolitionist, and I can take the abolitionist track as far as people want that to be a part of this conversation. But I'll say this: anytime I'm talking about abolition, I don't mean abolition in the short term. Even though if we got rid of policing and prisons and all of that today, great. But when I'm talking about abolition, I'm meaning it as both like as a strategy to live my daily life for one, and then for two, as a long-term strategy on how we create more viable communities. And the only way we can create those communities is to not have police, not to have prisons in those communities. And like I said, willing to take that conversation as far as anybody in the chat wants to, as far as my fellow panelists wants to carry that discussion. But as far as defunding goes, defunding is one step towards that goal, though.
Right.
Babies, we got to work our way towards that, though. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Also,
right.
I think before we get to the point where we take them too far, we also have to recognize, how we got here, right? Because we're saying defund the police, and people are probably saying, what is this new thing? Where did this come from? And I think it's important to kind of orient ourselves with a historic understanding of what this moment is and how we, again, arrived, right? So defund the police kind of begs the question, why do police have so much money in the first place? And that really has to do with the way that American cities have developed. So without making this a huge history lesson, if you go back to, for example, the New Deal, right in FDR, you see what happened was there was this mass investment on a federal level, this mass restructuring of financial support for public services like housing, public services like food and healthcare, this infrastructure and education to make sure that people could sustain themselves because we were in the midst of a depression. Something like this kind of was built on when you get to president like Lyndon Johnson and talk about his war on poverty. There was an explicit and this was also in the midst of a civil rights movement. So there's this explicit creation of this web of social services. But what happens then is presidents like Nixon and presidents like Ronald Reagan with new federalism, they want a smaller government, they want a smaller thing. And so with new federalism, they take away this federal support. Everything comes down to a state level, which means it comes down to the way that cities govern themselves. And what they started doing was just stripping money out of places like food banks, healthcare, public housing, et cetera, et cetera. So the problems were here, the problems remained, but the things that would normally solve them are gone. And instead, all of that falls to police or other social actors like teachers who are expected to do more than maybe what their job description actually says. So when it comes to this idea of defunding the police, part of the reason why there is so much disinvestment or economic segregation is because there was actual segregation as these processes were happening. You know, civil rights movement doesn't occur until 1960s. People were segregated, well, cities were segregated well into the 40s before that, and well into it after that, even though it wasn't declared. So what you see then is that the police or the budgets for them are really just a reflection of this kind of economic organization that was a deliberate part of public planning that disproportionately disinvests Black communities. And you can see this, for example, even here in District 2, where I believe two of the four most impoverished zip codes in San Antonio are in District 2. So I just wanted to kind of ground us with that and saying, like, this doesn't come from nowhere. This is what we're talking about. So in the same way that abolition and defunding is not an overnight process, how we got here wasn't just this all of a sudden thing with Minneapolis. And I want, yeah.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you. Camille and Amori, did y'all have more to add on the long-term goals that you see for defunding?
You can take it first. I'll close this out.
Okay, Amori?
I'll just say very briefly, I really would love to see less homeless people. I would like to see less homeless people thrown in jails when they have nowhere else to go. There is enough money available that everyone should have a place to live, even if it's temporary.
I think to build on that.
That's a great point, yeah. No, I'm good. I'm good.
Camille, you didn't have anything to add? Just wanted to make sure.
Well, for long-term goals that I can think of is, yeah, just understanding that for any new people that may have joined, that we are all clear and we are all on the same page that defunding is a step towards abolition. I think long-term is just really having the police do less jobs. As Amori spoke on beautifully earlier with her personal experiences, we're calling police for way too much. So I want to be able to call them for less and really have them uphold the who do you protect, who do you serve type thing that we've been in the streets yelling for over 40 days. So long-term goals for me personally is just having them do less jobs. I don't want to call a police officer at all, but let alone for a mental health issue. Good to go.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question. What are some immediate steps that community can take in defunding? And, you know, if you're in the comments, feel free to add some of your thoughts as well. Does anyone have any ideas right now? Amori, Camille, Rich?
I can start this time.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I will say just extending out past San Antonio is really demand your city officials, the people that work for you, to show you what the budget looks like. I don't think I knew what a city budget looked like until I started this work with my peers. And I think that it's important. It's public information. And if you don't live in San Antonio, or even if you do, that's one thing that you can start with is really educating yourself on what that budget looks like and clear numbers as to less money here, more money here. Why does this get twice as much as this? So I think that's something that the community can start doing now.
Yes, that's amazing. And there's some comments coming in. You know, first of all, there was 50 days of BLM protests yesterday, I guess. So that's amazing. And then we also have some comments coming in saying, you know, invest in mental health services, invest in housing. Yes. And so does anyone else have more to add on how the community, what are some immediate steps community can take?
I have something to add. I'm not sure if this fully I don't know how to fully relate, but I think churches have so much power. And I really think if more Black and brown churches would step into this work, I think they can make more leeway than a lot of us can individually. I kind of also mention this because churches have a lot of space, a lot of resources. And if we're talking about community, I mean, churches are many times pillars of communities. This is coming from me. I'm an agnostic. That doesn't mean I'm not someone who's an atheist. I just think in God in many different ways. But churches are literally everywhere when I go to Southeast Side, San Antonio, or you go to West Side. And I don't really see them pulling their weight to help the community members who line the pews.
I'll give a suggestion that folks can be involved in immediately based on stuff that's happening in Fort Worth and in Dallas, and I imagined happening in every city in Texas and probably most states as well too. So Marlon definitely knows a lot more about this in San Antonio, and I guess the rest of y'all probably know some information about this too. So in Fort Worth, July 14th, we recently had a vote on CCPD. And that's just crime control prevention division or whatever. And that's federally funded money that's given to each county to add. In our case, in the case of Fort Worth, is around an extra 11 million, I think, or so, however much it was, dollars to to policing budgets to create safety. But so the first step is being sure to vote no on those type of budget items and those things that increase the capacity of policing. But unfortunately, in Fort Worth, and I imagine in many other states and in many other places in Texas, the provision still passed. So Fort Worth is still going to get that money. However, the good news for that, typically that vote goes unchallenged. It's usually 99% people who vote in favor to 1% who don't. But this time, I think it was 65%, 45%. So there's definitely a mood change, which is good. But that's only step one. The second step, and this is what I try and tell people about another aspect of what defunding means, besides just taking funding out of police budget, it also means holding folks accountable. The Black Futures Collective is really good about this. It's about holding our local officials accountable for the way that they're spending money in our cities, because we as constituents and people who live there, we should have a say and access into where those funds go. So being able to participate in town hall meetings or setting up meetings with legislators is a really good idea. And then similarly as important to those things is creating those kind of oversight committees and things like that, and making it possible where citizens can have participation in the decisions that determine how money is supposed to be spent. And these items come up relatively frequently. It's just that a lot of people don't know about those things. So it's just a matter of knowledge, and then finding ways to have your voice represented in those areas.
Yeah, I can segue off of that really quickly because I think Rich touched on some things that I wanted to mention. So the local kind of parallel to what we're talking about here with Dallas, for San Antonio, would be a very immediate step that you can make towards defunding the police would be to participate in the trial budget survey. It's open until the end of this month, and you can indicate that you want the budget to be prioritized towards things like housing, towards things like education, because we are looking at, a school term where people are expected to come back to school in the midst of a global pandemic, right? So when we reallocate or when we choose to prioritize these other services, we're communicating to city officials that we want to create a model that can, for example, maintain its ability, this is the way that schools are, to feed kids lunches, but maybe not necessarily have them in that same space, so that in this way we're able to have a comprehensive approach towards resolving a problem like COVID. So when we're saying defund the police, it's really an exercise in imagination, and I think that's why it's so hard for a lot of folks to sort of consider it, because you have to imagine a world, one, without police, but then two, where we're meeting these challenges that we've been kind of foisting off and shuffling off to police instead of actually to solve or to manage, instead of solving them before they happen. And that's it.
Y'all brought up some really amazing points, and some of the comments, if somebody can drop the link to the what is that, to the budget, so that people can start to sign on to that if they have not, that would be amazing. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna
We'll make sure it's on our socials. If not, Black Freedom Factory too.
Yes,
has a lot of these resources for you guys.
definitely.
Nice.
Okay, cool. We got it posted. So I'm gonna move on to some other questions that we got from our Instagram. Let's see. So some of the concerns are that, defunding, we're talking about defunding, the San Antonio Police Department. Somebody has a concern and they say, I have concerns that cuts to SAPD will be first made to their mental health unit. How can we center community in the conversation and make sure that, that doesn't happen, or maybe the money is going to somewhere that still supports mental health?
Yeah. I'll just say something quickly about that generally. One of the things that we have to be careful about when we're talking about defunding the police is that once you defund the police or you take money out of the police budget, it doesn't go back into another element that also polices people. And one of those, I think it was also mentioned in one of the comments, like CPS services and things like that, other forms of policing that don't name themselves as policing. So when we're talking about defunding, it's important that we center we center the experiences of the folks that are most deeply impacted by this. And by that, I mean trans, queer, Black, and brown folks. Like, those are the people who are most deeply impacted by the policing system. So that's step one. And then step two, thinking through programs and initiatives that are community supported, because like CPS, those things aren't necessarily within the community. So thinking about the programs that are not even necessarily programs, creating a network of people to handle some of those issues, like a mental health crisis that someone's going through. You don't necessarily need to see a mental health professional about that. If someone's having a mental health issues, there are multiple ways to do that without outsourcing it to a facility or an institution. Because something else that happened in another conversation that I was having about this is they brought up a really good point in that during the 1970s, there was something called deinstitutionalization, which is where mental health facilities, they shut down a lot of mental health facilities as a way of deinstitutionalizing them. And what that actually led to 1980s, 90s prison booms, because those folks who were no longer in those facilities then became incarcerated. Or like Amari's hit on several times, it's compounded problems problems of homelessness and things like that. So that's just kind of like my 2 cents on that, is that we have to think outside of the box and not necessarily depend on depend on any form of policing, not just actual police officers.
Yeah, so does anyone else have anything to add on the comment that we had from Instagram of concerns around mental health not being centered, or is anything coming up for anyone else?
Yeah, I can go. For mental health and also for other problems in general, the quickest way to do it, or the easiest way to kind of center these voices, one is to take advantage of the city channels that they give you to do that, because they can't really ignore that input. They use it as justification for their policy and for their movements, right? So one, take the budget. 2, in the second half of August, show up in city council when they ask for public input. And 3, join other folks that are already on the ground doing this. Whether you want to join Black Future Collective, or whether you want to join the Defund SAPD Coalition, there are countless other organizations that are on the ground moving and organizing around these principles. So find one that you believe in, find one that you identify with, or that is within a field of work that you want to impact, and do what you can to help them, whether that's a public campaign to pressure your council person, or whether it's to protest. Whatever works, you'll find your kind of avenue or your medium of expression there.
Okay, great. Thank y'all so much, and thank y'all for the comments coming in. Really appreciate it. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to some other questions and comments that we have. So let's see. This is from Instagram. How can the movement to defund SAPD work in solidarity with anti-immigration detention? Anyone want to go in first on this question?
I'm trying not to go full Fred Hampton over here. But I think what immigration detention centers, and also what the specific aspect of police brutality that we see, or over policing in Black communities, what they have in common is this model of this model that indicates the profit nature of policing, right, and the prison industrial complex, and that there is an incentive to sort of select these or outline these populations of people that you can retain, whether it's in a detention center, or retain it whether it's in a prison, and then exploit for a certain amount of labor, right? So coming back to the question, how can the movement to defund work in solidarity with anti-immigration detention? I think it's to join these conversations, to sort of jointly work towards the specific goals of defunding within the short term, but then to also begin to coalesce your social and organizational infrastructure so that you can have a larger conversation about what it means to go further than this. What are the appropriate next steps? Because the reality is that it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. The problems and the timeline that are going to be relevant to San Antonio will not be the same across Texas, or for a city like Chicago, for example, right? So it's really about coming to this work in good faith with one another, and understanding that there's going to be growing pains where your lack of education or your ignorance as to the specific struggle of this other person are going to at times hamper you, but to always act within good faith and towards a constructive spirit, that all the corrections that you're going to make are for the good of the movement.
Anyone else have comments that they want to add about how the movement to defund SAPD can work in solidarity with anti-immigration detention?
I can, from a protest standpoint. I think that we already are. I think that one of the biggest things is that we had at the beginning of the protest, which somebody said, I think 50 days. We don't know which day of the week it is, if you can't tell. But somebody says it's always the, like, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Trust me, we care about all of it. But we want to attack it in a way that we don't have to come back and do this over again, right? Because this police system was built this way. So we don't have to attack it and then have to attack it and then have to attack it and do it again and again. So I think that we are already having those conversations, but we are trying to move in a way that is permanent. We don't want to put temporary things into place. So coming from, again, the protest standpoint, there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations and saying that you're protesting for Black lives, but you don't care about the kids in cages. Of course we do. Of course we do. If that's something that you've been working on specifically, come to us. Let us know what we can do to help educate us. Because again, as somebody that's new to defund, there's a lot of things I'm sure that I can learn about ICE. And I would love to help. And I think I can speak for all of us that we would love to. But a lot of the times that we're trying to have separate conversations when we can really all speak about the same thing.
I'm just going to echo what Celeste said in the comment section over here. I can't say it better myself. Abolishing the police means ICE too. Whenever we're talking about police abolition, or we're talking about defunding the police, we're trying. So maybe I should have said this sooner. But when we're talking about defunding the police, it is very much the very act of taking away funding from police departments. But way more importantly than the act of taking money away from police departments and from policing itself, it's the act of disempowering policing. So we want to shrink the reach of where police can go, and we want to do that slowly and steadily, because as we are shrinking the reach of policing, at the same time, we are expanding the reach of our communities. So my abolitionist vision, and this is just for me right now, my abolitionist vision is to slowly, it's not necessarily slowly, but in tandem with defunding efforts of policing, in tandem with all the work that great organizers are doing on the ground, in terms of calling out the racism, sexism, heteropatriarchal bigotry, the transphobia, the Islamophobia, all the anti-immigrant status, the anti-immigrant sentiments that exist within all forms of policing. In tandem with all that is happening, we can simultaneously start developing the resources for our own communities to build them up. That way, as we're working towards not having the police in our communities, we are simultaneously working on what are the resources that our community needs now to make sure that you and I and all those marginalized groups feel safe. So, and when I say I, that includes all those marginalized groups that I was talking about earlier, including immigrants and including anybody who doesn't meet the status quo, who doesn't meet whoever the law is normally meant to protect. We did a whole workshop on like what is policing before, and one of the things that we kind of like to hit on when we do that workshop is that policing isn't necessarily about enforcing the law. It's about enforcing control over certain groups of people. So as long as we as organizers and activists are trying to center marginalized communities in our work, including immigrants, we're in that practice of centering those experiences in both defunding and, for me more specifically, in abolitionist efforts.
Right. Yeah, all of y'all made amazing points, and I'm really loving, the comments coming in. Somebody spoke to, honestly, I'm not supposed to be adding comments, but I'm going to just comment briefly on this. Somebody spoke to it as well and said that immigration is a Black issue. Like there's Black folks in, migrant detention centers.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, right. And so we, whenever we say Black Lives Matter, we're not just talking about, us, and we're not just talking about like, Black rich folks or whatever. Like we're talking about Black poor folks. We're talking about Black homeless folks. We're talking about Black trans folks. We're talking, you know what I mean? So I really appreciate everything that everybody just said, because that is exactly true. And one other comment I just wanted to make is that we are, in we are part of a defund coalition, and so we are working with other organizations and other individual people from larger organizations that have to do with migrant justice and who continuously do that work. So this is, anti-immigration work is a part of defunding as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I'm going to go back to my moderator role. And we have, so it's 8:15 right now. I'm going to say we're going to go until 8:30. And we're going to have one more comment from our Instagram. And then after that, we're just going to maybe finish up some thoughts if moderators, if panel members have any other additions. So this is our last comment from Instagram. Let's see. So basically, this person is speaking to the issue of gentrification. So they're saying they need to fix up the houses of our Black and Brown legacy families that are being pushed out via gentrification. CPS Energy and the city have programs in place to fix up houses, but with a tiny budget. And so how can we center that issue, or what are some things that are coming up for y'all? Camille, I don't know. Sorry.
I know, Amori, you touched on homelessness, so if you want to go first.
That right there is such a good question. You know, I really admit that I don't have all the knowledge to know how the money would be reallocated and so forth. I will say, though, that when I did need certain services from, well, it was not CPS Energy. I forget the name of it right now, but there's a wait list that you can get on to get affordable housing. And this was when I was in my early 20s. That list took close to 3 years to finally hear anything back from. And when I finally heard back from it, they ended up blending together my name along with the name of my brother together. Whoever was on that form was no one who actually exists. So imagine having waited that long. Luckily by then I had found an option that worked for me, but it was completely useless. I would love to hear more about CPS Energy being able to use their money to help. I didn't even know that that was a service that they had to help fix up houses. I really don't know what else I can add to this particular question. I'm here to learn too.
I can kind of jump in. So I think to this person's credit, right, they're highlighting the fact that, you know, there are these programs that already exist to provide these very specific services to help folks, right? So the first step in helping would be, as we said, to reallocate what funds are available from that budget. And so this is not just for housing, but for any given public service. You want to identify who these programs and actors would be and who they would specifically serve. So you want to target communities that were typically or historically disenfranchised and abandoned, really, right? So to the larger part of this idea of how do you combat something like gentrification, or how does defund the police pertain to that, it's this really it would be a long-term aspect of public education, in the sense that you have to understand, again, where is it that cities are getting this money from? Well, they're getting it from the public budget, the city budget. How is the city budget drafted? Well, it's done using tax dollars. So then that breaks down to like, okay, well, who are the most, if they're based on property, for example, then where's the most property coming from? This is the interest that people are going to be acting within. And because, let's say for San Antonio, there is so much property on the north side, or that we typically regard, or that's well aware and documented, that that's where the richest populations of folks live, that means that these folks are not going to, their interests are going to be prioritized on a more natural or regular level, unless these folks in impoverished areas like East Side, like the West Side, like the South Side, are organized amongst themselves, synchronize their talking points, and coordinate with the plan to City Hall that says, hey, you're spending $15 million on the police budget to upgrade their Windows servers when they're in their patrol cars for the laptops. Let's take some of that instead, and let's talk about a housing first program for homelessness in the city, so that instead of putting these homeless folks in jail, we're actually giving them a home and a way for them to kind of access their own sense of agency and move forward, so that the problem, the social problem of homelessness, is actually addressed at its root, and it's not this thing that we kind of manage with a punitive force like policing.
Somebody said in the comments that housing is healthcare, and 10 out of 10, yes. So I just wanted to highlight that and flag that for sure. Yeah, that's a very good point.
And it's a very literal point in the context of a global pandemic. So let's remember that. If they're on the street and they're sick, then it means we're going to get sick as well. So even if you don't care about homeless people, there's your buy-in on a personal level.
And you know, since we're talking about housing, and housing also relates to healthcare, many jobs are very hesitant to hire people who don't actually have a physical address. So if a person doesn't have a physical address, then you have to find someone who's willing to act like you live with them. And if you can't find someone who acts like you can live with them, well, then where are you going to get your work documents to be sent? Where are you going to get your W-2 sent if you don't have any electronic way to receive it? A lot of things which people who are already benefiting from the system, who don't really have any type of disenfranchisement from, that's the problem. There is a lack of them being able to empathize and relate to how it is not to have certain things.
Yeah, that is an amazing point, and I think one other thing that this is touching on as well is like healthcare, and so I don't know if any of y'all have anything to add about healthcare and how we can support our healthcare workers through defunding SAPD. Does anyone have anything on that?
Well, just a couple of weeks ago, San Antonio made national news because we did not have enough health hospital beds and because we were running short. So we have a very clearly overtaxed healthcare system when it comes to the idea of how the defunding would begin to help that. The most natural kind of movement there is capital injection, right? Let's make sure there's really shouldn't be an excuse that protesters are met with police in full riot gear and tear gas and rubber bullets, but the same people, health doctors, surgeons, etc., that are classified as frontline workers and essential workers are running out of PPE to fight off this literal public threat that does not discriminate and that will impact all of us, right? So, but beyond that, a lot of our conversation within healthcare is obviously because of COVID and the pandemic that it creates here. And what I think all of us are seeing is that this pandemic really lays bare the faults of our system. And what we've seen definitely in San Antonio is, for example, something as basic as food security. And again, coming back to the national headlines, we also had a food bank that had record length lines and was trying to figure out how it was essentially going to feed an entire city. So when we talk about healthcare, in the same way that this notion of defunding the police sort of demands a certain amount of imagination and for you to kind of reconsider what your idea of public safety is, COVID also invites you to reconceptualize what your idea of public health care is, because it is reliant on things like housing, or is reliant on things like education to know how to take care of yourself and others. It is reliant on the infrastructure of a city being safe enough and secure enough for people to navigate to find these channels and provide for themselves. Healthcare, what we're seeing here is that what COVID shows us is that we are only as secure as our weakest links. And if we purposefully abandon these populations prior to this, then now is the time for us to come back and support them.
The only thing that I'll say about healthcare, like earlier today, I posted a story on my Facebook and social media just about like, what can defunding look like? And I used an example from the 1960s about how EMTs actually got started. Our modern day system of EMTs got started from poor Black people living in Pittsburgh. But who were these poor Black people that were living in Pittsburgh? There are people who didn't have educational resources. Most of them didn't have a GED, or most of them didn't have a high school diploma. They're considered unemployable. Most of them didn't have jobs. Most of them had prior convictions or felony records. But what did they do? They were skilled up and they were trained in medical services to provide for their community, because policing, much like today, was used as a catch-all to take care of every need in the community. So these Black folks in that community in Hill County, what they were able to do, they were able to develop skills not only to protect their community, but also all the surrounding communities. And all the data, if you look at the research from how effective the Freedom House ambulance was, they're far more effective than any other sponsored response team at that time. And like I said previously, they led the way to our modern day EMTs. And the reason why I bring that up as an example is that we don't have to outsource the safety, because the whole reason why they even came to existence was over safety concerns in Black communities. We don't have to outsource our safety to other people. We just need to think of creative ways to use the people or to provide for the people we have. Because that program, it did a couple things. It provided them with jobs for one. It provided them with skills and training, another thing, education. It provided them with safety. It provided them with means of transportation. It provided them with so many different resources that they wouldn't have had in any other capacity. And that's kind of like what I say is fundamental. And the last thing it provided them with, like this healthcare aspect, they're able to handle drug addiction and all sorts of other things that are happening in their community, again, without relying on outside intervention and without relying on policing. And I only use that as an example because that's one possibility. If we think and work together collectively to build up our communities, we can create a revolution. Basically, we can do all those things that we want to do, and it comes from us, and it doesn't have to come from outside sources.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. We are almost at the 8:30 mark. We're just gonna Amori, sorry. Yeah, so we're gonna add a few more things. So first we're gonna talk about defunding the police here in San Antonio and how that relates to the work of sex workers. Also, before we get into that, I did want to mention and show appreciation for y'all posting comments and also posting the Cash App and the Venmo. Please go ahead and send some funds there so that we can get Black folks money, not only our lovely panelists, but also Black folks in the community. We are doing a rest campaign right now to get Black folks mattresses and weighted blankets and therapy as well. So we're going to go ahead and discuss the issue of, how defunding SAPD would affect sex workers and their work. And so, Amori?
So I want to keep this brief, but there is no way, in my opinion, we can talk about disenfranchised people without mentioning sex workers. A lot of sex workers are Black and brown people, trans people. Sex workers can be any possible gender. Sex workers can come from any possible demographic. If we are being honest about police really do condemn sex workers. Many sex workers are also homeless. Many sex workers don't have the safety to be able to safely do what they're doing without police threatening to come into their work office, aka hotel, motel, street location. Some sex workers may have a more organized way to do what they do, but if they don't have a house, they don't have that privacy and security. When a person is doing sex work, it's not always because there's no other options. There are people who willingly do this. There are also people who do sex work because some people may have other options too. But when police are called on sex workers, many times people go through assault. Many times people end up having a record. Many times, even if a person wants to get out of doing sex work, it's hard for them to be able to go and be employed at certain jobs because our society has a moral issue with sex workers. Police need to do less when it comes to condemning someone who's trying to survive, and there need to be more units that are able to provide condoms, more units able to provide safe spaces. There's just so many ways we can help people such as that too. And I really think one reason sex workers don't really get help is because a lot of them are from communities which may not be the ideal. Yeah, they do harass sex workers, really do.
Yeah, I think another reason why sex workers don't get the kind of proper help is because when we allow ourselves to abandon them, then it allows them to become criminals. So when we talk about the criminality, there's this barrier in the sense that as long as community is not present, then police and the subsequent like law enforcement agencies are able to make this specific population of people out to be wrong. And so then it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling narrative of like sex work is wrong because sex workers are criminals because they had nothing else to do, or because even if they did have another option, it begins an easy way for this to kind of like pathologize that particular line of work. And I mentioned this because I wanted to circle back to something that Rich said before about this idea of defunding the police being for the good of everyone or centering the most vulnerable. Something that you've probably heard me said, if you've heard me have a conversation about this, is that San Antonio and really the world is kind of waking up very late to a conversation that has been happening for a long time. You know, Angela Davis has been writing books about this for I don't know how many decades at this point, right? But what this means is that in addition to there being people who have come before us that have done this work and had these thoughts and worked out some of these processes, it means that there's also evidence that can show that some of this works. And so my favorite thing to kind of come back to is this 2009 Nobel Prize winner in economic policy, which is a woman named Eleanor Ostrom. And specifically, she has this thesis that's called For the Good of the Commons. And she developed it by studying police agencies in Chicago and throughout America. And she really found that, you know, higher police budgets don't necessarily rate to higher rates of efficiency. And in fact, what she has determined was that the smaller and more decentralized a police force was, the higher its efficacy, the higher its effectiveness, and the more happy the people were because they had a semblance of control over their lives, and because the money that normally would have went into those departments went into these roles of critical support. So as we kind of imagine a world of, or as we try to draft and create a world with you know, of defunded police and towards the road of abolition, we have to really kind of reference and lean on these things that these people that have come before us, because they really sort of show you the way and showing that not only is all of this possible, but it works and it's for the good of everyone.
Right. Yeah. Did anyone else had anything more to add? Someone in the comments is also saying that I've also heard and seen sex workers who don't have the resources to move their work online because of the pandemic. And so, yeah, these are definitely issues that, you know, we want to center in the work that we're doing. And you know, defunding SAPD is definitely a part of that. And so I did want to go to to Camille. I saw here you wanted to quickly or briefly, if you want to take a moment to honor, you know, the folks that we have lost, not only here in the city, but outside of the city as well.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and one of the things that moves us as Black Futures Collective is how police have affected our local communities. So my shirt is a walking, talking marketing tool of that. It's very important that if you live in this city, that you know these names that are on my shirt, that you speak these names, empower their families, amplify their voices. Too many times locally we forget and we look at the larger picture, but it's important to bring it back to here. One of the things that go hand in hand with defund SAPD that you can't find on the budget is reparations for these families. There's no reason that if your family member is killed by somebody in the police that you should have to pay for that yourself, that you should still have to work. Still live with that every single day. We talked about mental health care and housing, and all of that stuff should go back towards these families. So quickly, Charles Roundtree, Antony Scott, Marquise Jones, just a shout out to those families. Thank you for allowing us to fight this fight with you. We will never speak for you, but thank you for allowing us into that space. We had a good moment today. Black Futures Collective and Black Freedom Factory partnered on a great protest today. We will continue to do that. Education is always at the top of our list. I saw a comment that said that this was a great panel. Got emotional. This was like one of my first. So thank you guys for pulling up in this space, and just also always remember that these local names are always at the center of the work that we do, and defunding SAPD will go directly back to reparations for these families.
Powerful.
Yes, thank you so much, Camille. And if we can, just take everyone listening and everyone on the panel, just taking a moment of silence for, the lives lost here in San Antonio, and any lives that, you have personally lost as well to this movement. Thank y'all so much for being here and taking that moment. This is really the reason why, we do this work. Not because we really, want to, like, it's just that we, don't want to see our siblings, our brothers and sisters dying in the streets. And, that is what this fight is about. That is what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. And so, yeah, I really appreciate all of y'all being here. I think a couple other things that we want to do before we close this out. Katie, I don't know if you can put up the, what is it? The image of just the budget really, really quickly before we close out as well. Cool. I don't know if that's working for.
You might have to remove the defund SAPD banner so they can see. There you go.
Yeah.
There we go.
So
Check that out, y'all.
So this is really the invention of inequality. And so it's not just that we put this money into the police budget, but it's also that we purposefully defund, as you see, housing, health, and human services, but also community development and improvement projects. And so when we have a more equitable distribution of these things, what we can see is real development and real care for our communities, and so that they're not set up to be criminalized, or so they're not disadvantaged by way of life choices or life opportunities, right? This is really the central nerve of what we're kind of do, and this is why we sort of oppose a lot of the reforms of the more knee-jerk reforms of something like 8 Can't Wait, right? Because quiet as it's kept, police as a whole, police as an institution is already reformed, especially when you consider their initial role as slave patrols. That was the origin of this thing. And so what we have today as police is already the reformed version. And so in moving forward, we have to kind of be careful not to make that misstep of maybe something as common as body cams or more training that really only would serve to give them more money.
And that's why, Marlon, some of the reform efforts that people say, like giving police more training, training them in de-escalation techniques, body cameras, all sorts of those different things, those are not adequate responses to policing, because what those do, those continue to empower the system of policing, the system of patrol, for one. And then the other thing, like you well mentioned, body cams didn't save Walter Scott. Body cams didn't save the store owner who got shot during one of the Louisville protests a couple of weeks ago. Like, I had a whole long conversation with my mom about that incident, because my mom lives right outside of Louisville. The first incident and reports about that particular story was that the store owner fired on the cops and the cops fired in response. And they could see that from the body cams. But then when you look at 3 other different video cameras, you see that the black store owner was shot 4 times before he even had a chance to get out his weapon or whatever. So like it's all sorts of things like that. What else doesn't work? Community policing doesn't work. That's George Zimmerman in a nutshell right there. George Zimmerman was working as a community police officer. So when we're talking about, I want to make sure everybody's clear on this. When we're talking about defunding the police, we mean, and everyone's done a really good job of kind of stating that this on the panel. We mean like the system of policing. Like we don't want that to be reincarnated in another way. So the ways that we look at policing, we don't want to police the police. We don't want it, like we want to remove the police, that because having citizens police themselves, like y'all seen the memes of Karen and Becky and whoever, like that's just as deadly. Those real life Karens and Beckys, they're not police officers. They don't got a badge number, but they're absolutely equally as harmful to our communities as right. Police themselves, because they're citizens performing those exact same functions. So as part of the defunding the police conversation, we've got to make sure that when we're defunding police, that we're not refunding it in another form or outsourcing police work for other folks to do the exact same thing or to do a similar thing. And that gets into another conversation. I want to hear, I'm going to put this out there, part 2, abolition. What we got to do is abolition is. That's not for right now, though. That's not for right now.
Last call, bartender. Last call.
Okay, awesome. Thank y'all so much. Yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. I don't know if Camille and Amori, y'all have anything else to add to the conversation. But after that, I think we'll close out.
Before they add on, I was going to say before they add on that real oppression is wearing headphones over your afro so that it's lopsided on camera. That's the oppression I've been fighting today. I just couldn't let this call in without saying that.
Hey, that afro met with the DA, so that's a strong afro. That's a strong afro.
Okay. Clearly, our panelists are getting delirious. We're gonna.
I'm gonna say one more thing about the comments on here. We didn't really get to talk about another conversation. We got to get police out of schools too, because that's really important. That's it.
Yes, that is a very important point that we didn't get to today.
I think Amori wants to say something. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm low-key happy to see people agreeing with me about churches need to contribute. A lot of people are giving so much money to them, and I'm still not really seeing much really helping the people who it benefits. I really want to see that. They're everywhere. That's a lot of money. Where is it going? Happy to be here.
Yes. Very true. Appreciate. Here's the budget one more time, but so if y'all appreciated this conversation, if y'all want to see us do a part 2, if y'all want to see more of this conversation and join in on it as well, because we didn't get to some important points like school, like getting the police out of schools, which work is being done by our youth as well. So if you want to see that, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Black Futures Collective. Please also send us some funds to our beautiful panelists, as well as sending general funds for rest and therapy, because Lord knows Black folks need it. But thank y'all so much for tuning in, and yeah, hope y'all have a good evening. Defund SAPD.
100.
Yeah.
Later.
Get
Thank you guys
Richard
for
out of
joining
here.
us.